how much do you want it? Do you want that photo? Yes or no? Are you willing to drive that 3 hours? Can you be uncomfortable for one day? Can you sleep out and camp someplace for just one day and then push yourself that one time? And if you can do that, you expand your world considerably.
Welcome to Pixels, where we explore the heart and art of photography. I'm Beth Bilo, and I am so glad that you've decided to join me. Pixels is supported in part by the Nature Photography Collective. I'm a member of the NPC team as a mastermind facilitator and a workshop leader, and I have found it to be a truly amazing community of photographers. You can learn more at naturephotocollective.com. I'm pleased to welcome Nathan St. Andre to the podcast. Nathan is a professional photographer, father, biologist, and all-around cool person. He's been a photographer for more than 10 years, with most of his work focusing on the desert Southwest and the national parks. His work has been sold at art shows around the western half of the United States, with his images now residing in homes and cities across the world. Nathan also serves as the Nature Photography Collective workshop lead for the American Southwest. Nathan and I would love to know in the comments what you found most useful or meaningful in this conversation. Drop us a few words, like and share this content, and subscribe if you'd like to see more pixels in your feed. Thank you so much for being with us. And now on to the conversation. Hi, Nathan. Welcome to Pixels. I am so glad to be connecting with you today.
Awesome. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, it's a new year. We're recording this in the early days of 2026. So I'm wondering, what are you looking forward to in the new year?
Okay. So new updates and things that I'm looking forward to in the new year. The biggest one is really the Nature Photo Collective and kickstarting all the workshops. So that begins next month for me. And so that's the biggest change that's coming up photographically for me. The next kind of shift that might be happening for me is I'm looking to kind of rebrand my art booth for just focusing around national parks. And so I spent yesterday doing inventory and then spent this morning actually going through all, or at least a chunk of my photos to see which ones are national park based, which ones aren't, and which ones are important, let's say, when it comes to sales versus others that I have that are not doing much other than taking space. And so I'm in the process of thinking about all of that. And then artistically, when it comes into the new year, that's a good question. This year is going to be a big teaching year for me. And so I'm seeing what I want to do and what I don't want to do. Some things I've always wanted to do is learn how to do star trials really well, not mediocre. I can do mediocre star trials really well. I really want to learn how to do really, really nice ones. And so I think that's one of the kind of artistic endeavors I want to do this year.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, always trying to push yourself to that next level of what you're doing. And I want to follow up for a second on the photo booths and, I'm assuming you're doing art fairs, or how does that show up?
That is the all-consuming how I pay bills. Right.
Yeah.
So I run a art booth, and so I do art shows. So I can either do a 10 by 10 or 10 by 20 foot art space. I set up at various locations, mostly here in Utah, but occasionally other states. And I display my images. And so my images are, I have really big pictures. I have small paper prints. I don't have any quite within grabbing distance. And so that's what I do. That's really how I have made a huge chunk of my income for the last 5 to 7 years, really has been doing art shows and focusing on, prints that sell, things that don't, and trying to figure out everything in between.
Yeah. If you had, and I'm kind of going down this little detour for a moment because I've heard other folks, talk about that as a possibility. And I know that there's pros and cons. So if somebody was listening to this and thinking about getting into that photo booth, the art fair kind of scene, what's one lesson you've learned that you wish you knew in the beginning might be super valuable for somebody?
Let's do two or three. So, first
Okay.
one is display is half your sales. In fact, it's the thing that is the most important thing right off the bat. If you
Mm-hmm.
have a mediocre display, you will have significantly less sales, hands down. And so that's the reason why you see if you've ever been to an art fair, why
Mm-hmm.
the booths look really nice, and why at least particularly the professional ones. That is a huge chunk of just getting people to look. The second major point that's worth your time to know if you're doing this, no one buys a size you don't have. And so if you want to sell a 20 by 30 inch picture, you have to have 20 inch by 30 inch printers. If you want to sell
Mm-hmm.
a 40 inch by 60 inch picture, you have to have at least one present for the people there to get the idea of what it looks like. Most people don't think of the world in dimensions like that. They live their daily life just doing normal existence. And normal existence doesn't look at a wall and say, oh, I wonder how a photo is going to fit there. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you think they're going to walk into your booth saying, I want that image, but I need it this size, they won't do it. They don't know how to
Yeah.
do it. It's in a different world of thinking that they've never really done. And
Yeah.
so that right there are the two most important lessons that I can give anybody who's starting out is you have to have the sizes of prints you want to sell, and you have to have a nice display. If you don't have that, you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Great advice. And maybe a follow up on the dimensions piece, because I know one of the things that's so intensive about doing art fairs is inventory. You have to have your stock on hand, right? And
Yep.
that requires a big outlay of cash on our part to begin with, hoping for a return on our
Yeah.
investment. And so when you talk about having the sizes that you want to sell, um, say uh, I have multiple images that might work in a 40 by 60.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily need to have all of those in a 40 by 60, do I? Or I just need to have one so I can say this is the size that it would be. Is
Yep.
that
Having
correct?
having a couple doesn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Because the big 40 by 60s do a couple things. They draw people in, but two, if they're a really good photo, they'll also sell at 40 by 60, and you'll end up selling
Yeah.
more pictures of that photo at 40 by 60. So,
Yeah.
so they
Yeah.
kind of do two purposes. But no, the way my booth currently is set up, I have one 40 by 60, one 48 by 72, or however you want to do it. Let's go from the largest to small. So I have a 48 by
Mm-hmm.
72 that comes out on occasion. I have a 40 by 60 that sits there all the time. I have a 30 by 60 that sits there all the time, and it's a different finish than my
Mm-hmm.
other prints. It's a matte finish versus a glossy, so you can see the two because they both have advantages and disadvantages.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a handful of 30 by 45s, a handful of 24 by 36s, and a couple 20 by 30s. I don't really do anything smaller than that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Occasionally, I will have a 16 by 24 out. Sorry, I have a cough that's coming up out of nowhere.
It's okay.
The reason why I don't do anything smaller really than a 20 by 30 is that the price to size ratio begins to not be in your favor, where the
Yeah.
cost of making the photo is kind of high. And when someone's going to display it on their wall, it's small, and small things don't generally demand high prices. And
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
that's one of the challenges when you see a lot of photographers. They'll sell a 16 by 20 paper print for $400. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is that very few people see that size and think it's big enough to justify the price. Even if the photo is world class and phenomenal and took forever to get and everything in between, it's a
Yeah.
price to size ratio.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if I were to take that 16, I think you said 16 by 20 print and have it framed and matted into something that was, something that would fill the space, that could easily be $600 or $700, right there.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you're not just buying that print, but everything that goes with it. Okay. So I
Yeah.
have one more follow-up question on this.
Yeah.
And I was not expecting to talk about this, but it's really interesting. How many folks walk in, like what percentage walk in and buy something and carry it out that day? And what percentage say, I really love that image, but I want it in a 40 by 60. So you have to, go off and do it and ship it and all that kind of stuff.
Once upon a time, it used to be a lot of people would buy my smaller pictures off the wall and walk off with them, and I would move a lot of pictures. Within the
Mm-hmm.
last year or two, almost everything that I sell is I want that photo in a different size.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
so it's
Interesting.
very different now than it used to be. I used to sell a lot of 20 by 30 inch pictures, but the reality is when you're trying to sell those at kind of like the magic price point, and this is fun for anybody. If you want to know the magic price point for anything, it's $300. Anything
Right.
lower than $300, you can sell it right away, and somebody will do it. The
Mm-hmm.
challenge is if you're trying to make enough money to live, there are
Right.
not enough people who are at art shows to buy enough $300 things for you to make enough money. And so even
Right.
if you sell 7 photos and you're like, wow, I sold 7 20 by 30s, you're going to walk away with maybe $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could sell 140 by 60 and walk away with $1,000. And
Right. Right.
so that's one of those challenging balance points. So how many people have to walk into the booth before you sell something? I don't know. That's a real
Mm-hmm.
big mystery to me, and I don't have a good answer for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just did a show this weekend that was really quiet and not really anything happened, but somebody came in, they bought a 24 by 36, and they're gonna hopefully pick up something else. Now, the
Yes.
more important thing when it comes to this idea that you're actually getting at is the more important one is you want to be able to have local shows and faraway shows, but particularly local shows if you're doing things.
Mm-hmm.
When someone walks into your booth and are interested in a picture, but they don't quite know for sure which size to get, the most important thing you need to do is get a phone number. You get a phone
Yes.
number and then you follow up and do an in-person visit for all local people. And then with that, you do an in-person visit, you figure out which picture works for their home. And if you're lucky, you can either upsell the size or you get a second photo out of it and you get an
Yeah.
additional sale. And that's
Yeah.
really the most important thing. So,
Okay. One more question. Just
okay.
when I thought I was done. Because I just had this conversation with a photographer yesterday talking about selling their work, and the usually when you're selling local, the interest is in images that are local, of that surrounding area. They don't want to see something from Patagonia if they're in New Hampshire, unless they traveled there, unless it's something aspirational. But generally speaking, it seems like people want the local image. What have you experienced around that dynamic?
That is very, very, very true.
Hmm.
So let's do before we answer it. Let me do story time. There used to be a
Mm-hmm.
photographer who used to live down here near me here in St. George. I don't actually know what happened to him. He used to post a bunch on the Color Country Camera Club that I'm here with, and then one day he disappeared. But he would do art shows, and so I saw him do art shows. He would occasionally come and be around me for other art shows, and then he went up to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And Jackson Hole, Wyoming is known for deep pockets. So exciting. But he brought a bunch of desert images. He did that whole show and never sold a single image to anybody up there at all. The reason why people live in Jackson Hole is because they like mountains and they like snow and they like aspens and they like bears and they like moose and they like everything associated with that region. And he brought all of his Desert Southwest images, and no one touched his stuff. He's like, this is how you spend 3 days and make $0.
Yeah.
So there is a strong reality to hyper local sales when it comes to doing art shows. And which is one of the reasons why I haven't done a ton of shows in other locations, is because I have really good hyper local to Southern Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
have marginal um, locality to other locations. And so right now I'm building out kind of a fairly decent Southern California collection,
Mm-hmm.
but that is not the same as somebody who lives there and has a really nice collection of images there. They will just simply do better than me. So yeah, having images of your local area matters a lot. And so if you're going to be bouncing around to doing different art shows, you have a handful of images that have proven worthy that sell anywhere. And then you have as much as you can try to fill in hyperlocal that hopefully do their best, and then whatever else you have left.
Yeah, awesome advice. Cool. Thank you. Thanks for going down that detour because I haven't even gotten to I haven't even gotten to the first question that I was hoping to ask you. But since you said something about story time, my first question actually has to do with storytelling, because you shared with me that you're getting more into storytelling with your photography, and so I'm wondering, what does that look like for you?
Okay, so let's think about what that looks like for me. So I just did Alaska this past summer, and so I went up there, and it turned into an ordeal and a half for me and for my dad, and then everything that happened along the way. And when I did that, when I finished, I looked at the photos and I said, these don't tell the full story of what the whole experience was like. It really was like, it was far from the reality, the lead up to going out there, to the issues that happen around going out there, the experiences that I had out there, and then kind of the follow up to, that. And so one of the things is I sat there and I did, did the final edits. I was like, this needs to have a legitimate story, not a, 60-second reel, not a single teeny tiny, Facebook post. Oh, it was wild. Wild does not get close to describe when you hear a serac above you collapse and crumble down the mountain towards you, and for a sheer moment you think you might die, and then you look at it, it's not going to be anywhere near you, but you have that moment, and you're like, hold up. There are experiences that I'm having out here that can't really be told quickly. And so I went through and I wrote that into a really long kind of blog post on my website. And the interesting thing that's happened post since that, there's a lot of people who are local who follow me, and never have I ever had anything I've ever posted before where people come up to me at art shows and said, holy cow, that was a crazy experience you wrote about in Alaska. I had a single show where I had 4 people come up to me and talk to me about that. I've never had anybody do that about a single photo from the trip. I've never had anybody talk to me about almost any other photo I've ever shared before. But that story in combination with images, that created enough change where people went out of their way to find me at an art show and talk to me about that. And so after that experience, I've been thinking a lot about kind of the experience in photography and the experience with creating images and the experience of like what I'm experiencing out there. And I'm realizing what I could do and what I should do is tell more stories with my writing and my images, which also means I need to do a better job filling in the space around the art photos with other images. But that combination seemed to hit a chord with people where it really seemed to matter rather than just the image itself. And I think this kind of hails back to the early days of landscape photographers. A lot of early landscape photographers shared their work as books, and you would have probably a lot more stories in those books. And where we've gotten to today is, and I don't know if you've seen this, where the internet goes through phases where photography turns into short, teeny tiny clips that they throw a bunch of images at you of being, these are my most fantastic photos of the year, and then they just leave you soulless or whatever you want to call it, empty, because they threw a bunch of images at people and then they didn't bother to explain their soul in the process. And so hopefully that answered your question, but I'm finding storytelling is starting to become a bigger part of how I'm thinking about my photography, how I can share my images. and how I want to move forward with my image taking in general. One of the things I'm uh, personally not enjoying is the internet anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
not enjoying just sharing images just to share images. It brings me no joy anymore just to have something go out there. And so if I can create stories that people bother to look at and read and see the images, that feels more meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I could do another story like Alaska where I had 5 people walk up to me and talk to me about it, that was one of the coolest things I've ever had happen. Even though it was just them talk about the images, no one bought any of the images, but they actually did something that took them time and effort and energy to do. So
Yes. Yes. And they might not have bought one in that moment, but that doesn't mean down the road they're not going to. It's like it's
yeah,
always planting seeds. It all moves towards something.
yeah.
It feels like that storytelling element is going to become more and more important as time goes on as AI starts to creep its way into our lives. Um, any thoughts on the relationship between storytelling, photography, and maybe how we stay relevant?
Ooh, so right off the bat, let's tackle the elephant in the room when it comes to AI and photography. I think there will be 2 types of people who will and will not be affected. You have the product photographers who are all reeling from the chaos. And then you have the portrait photographers who only made a living off of just headshots, which AI is starting to do some really phenomenal things, and you can just get really nice images quickly. The other side of photography that doesn't concern me at all is you have the fine art people, the people who take portraits of people to make them look beautiful. You
Mm-hmm.
can do model things like that, but we like looking at people. One of the things as a professor of photography, and when you have to actually just sit here and think about the way humans think, the way we look at the world, both because I'm a biologist and I do photography, humans love looking at other humans. We
Yeah.
love it. And I think that side of photography will forever be okay. There's a reason why paintings of portraits of people still exist, and we've been doing it for functionally 6,000 years. We love looking at people. I think they're fun. In the world of landscape photography, I don't and I'm not currently worried about AI swooping in and taking the sales.
Mm-hmm.
Partially because as an artist and as a photographer, when you're going out there, particularly when you're showing up in person to a show and you are displaying your work and saying, this is me, you once again are buying the human. Now, I have gone to farmers markets and I have seen AI generated little art things that the people have and are selling. Those are all $10 things, and they're cutesy and they're fun. And the people who are buying them aren't buying them because they feel like they're creating and or not creating. They're buying meaningful art. They're just buying things that are cutesy that they can stick on their wall. Most of them are, below the age of 25, and if they're older, they're buying them for kids, and they're doing small things like that. Now, if you're really legitimately making and producing, high caliber work as much as you possibly can, I don't think as of this time, AI and everything that's associated with that is going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then what was the other part of your question with that? You
How
had
about the storytelling element of it? How does that support, perhaps, or maybe even abate any fears that somebody has about AI encroaching on their market?
Yeah. And so this goes once again to this buying the human behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So the storytelling when it comes to your photography and the why I think people should do more of it. It's a lot more entertaining to read, particularly if you can go out of your way and make interesting write-ups about it. But people like that connection a lot. And the way at least AI writes right now, AI does a terrible job at making a legitimate voice other than perky and
Mhm.
shallow. It can make great perky and shallow conversations. It does a terrible job at actually being a human when it talks about the emotional experience behind it. Now, one of the things I personally hate when it comes to story writing is people when they pontificate. That might be your fancy word for the day. Pontificate or talk about them going out into the wilds and saying, "Oh, the emotional state of my whatever." Very rarely do I think most of those are legitimate or not. Sometimes they can be, but I think people do a lot of flowery writing when there's not really flowers to be had. Um,
Yeah.
but I find that if you can do a good job at telling the story of a photo, people will connect to it, and that ends up meaning something to them. One of the things that happens a lot when it comes to even my own personal selling is
Mhm.
when I go to and I talk about places that I've photographed, it means a lot to people. So I have a photo of it's a night picture in Zion National Park. It's of the Milky Way, and it has a Virgin River going through it, and you can see the whole thing. It's a blue hour blend. And
Mhm.
then everybody and their dog talks to me about this photo. And the thing that I really do is tell the story of that photo. Because when you're doing a good blue hour blend, it is a story. For that image, I had to go there at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3:30 or whatever, some awful early morning hour it was, where I drove out to Zion National Park and sat there by myself for 3 hours in the dark, photographing the stars, and then another hour sitting by myself and waiting for the stars to rotate in, and or not for the sun to rise, and then I can photograph the ground, and then I talk about blending the two images together to make it feel like how it would feel. And you know what I don't get? I don't get a single person who ends that conversation saying, "Oh, it's photoshopped, it sucks." Not a single one of them. Everybody will say, "Wow, that's really cool. You put the time and energy and effort into it," and they
Mhm.
love the photo. And that's my best selling
Yeah.
photo because
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't shy away from that story. I lean into the reality of what it took. It took me
Yeah.
all night. It took me, to sacrifice sleeping next to my wife, and which is, nice and comfortable. And it took me
Mhm.
to stand out there in the dark by myself. I have another one that's over here, just out of screen, where I listened to a lady talk about mountain lions. Why I did the exact same blue hour blend. And I can guarantee you, when you're sitting in mountain lion country by yourself for 3 hours in the dark, you start thinking about mountain lions the whole
For
time.
sure.
And you know what? It turns into a great conversation piece to talk to
Yeah.
people about, because they come in and they're like, "Oh, tell me about this photo." And then I can tell them about the time I sat 3 hours in the dark thinking about mountain lions and sitting there flashing my flashlight around to make sure I had no little glowing eyes coming towards me, because I was very much by myself and very much mountain lion country. And I had seen mountain lion tracks in that region, so I know they're there. And it makes
Yeah.
for a great story, and people buy the photo.
Yeah. 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 And it strikes me also, especially when it comes to valuing our work and telling that story. It's not even just that you got up at a certain hour and drove a certain distance and sat alone in the dark and all of that, but it's whatever years of preparation that positioned you to be able to do that in a way that got you what you wanted.
Yeah,
And that makes that's part of the investment that we make, that I believe, becomes part of our images.
yeah. So
Yeah.
tell your stories, people.
Yeah. Tell the stories. Tell the stories.
Yeah.
Um, well, one more question before we go to some pivot pixels. Most photographers, and even as you, it sounds kind of ironic to say after you talked about like mountain lion country, to say we enjoy the process of taking the photos.
Mhm.
um, but we do. You wouldn't have done that if you don't enjoy it. But there does get to be a point, and maybe I'm speaking for folks that are still trying to figure out how to put their work out there and what to do with it. There's kind of okay, so I'm doing all of this. I've got all these fabulous images. To what end? What is the purpose of this? So, what are your thoughts on navigating that, figuring out the purpose of what you're doing?
What is my purpose in life, right? Is this an existential question of
It's
existence?
maybe it's a little existential, but like, is doing it for the love of it enough? And if not, what's a way that you can start to think about why you're doing it?
Okay. This has been something that's definitely been on my mind in some form or another. Now, for the love is a solid good reason. I
Mm-hmm.
just, for people who love to just go out and take photos, be my guest. Spend your dollars, spend your time, spend your days, do everything within your power to just run around and take as many photos as you want. Have a great life. No shame on that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this gets to a couple things I think that I struggle sometimes with. This gets to why share your images. This gets to why print your images. This gets to why you go out, why you go through the pain of going off and doing all night pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, why? I guess the reason why anybody should do it is first and foremost, they have to love it. And if they are not doing that, and if they don't love it enough to put in that energy, they should find something that they do love enough to put in that energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know, think it like a companion or a spouse, right? Somebody who
Mm-hmm.
you have spent, you know, many hours with. Why do you bother with them? There's other people out there. There's younger, hotter women for me, right? That's the trade off, right? There's always somebody younger and prettier out there. Why
Mm-hmm.
do you put that effort into that? Because it, at the end of the day, it means a lot to me personally, and I don't want to give up my joy for a maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
It seems like you could, just your analogy, I'm thinking like, think of your photography as, what vows are you taking to it? Can you truly
right.
say, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, I am in with this?
That's a good way. I've never thought about that. That's a good way of putting it. What vows do you give to your photography? What promises do you make to yourself? That's, I think, where we're really getting into an issue now with going to the
Mm-hmm.
why. Why do we have so many people who are unwilling to put in the hard effort to go to a location and photograph the star trails and legitimately put in the effort for the star trails rather than going to a cool little program that you just click and select the sky and say add star trails and it will put in fake star trails?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you do that? Because you either assume your time is more valuable than that effort, which is possible,
Mm-hmm.
but you never
Mm-hmm.
you didn't make a promise to that landscape to truly honor
Mm.
it. All right,
Yeah.
you took away that promise and you replaced it with a cheap shortcut. You made it really easy to add that satisfaction, that joy, but you didn't actually put in the effort to win it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, one of those realities, like that promise you gave to that image. What am I doing for this image? I'm going to put in my heart and soul and everything into this image so that it will be as best as it can be. And sometimes my heart and soul still sucks and it comes out as a crappy photo.
Yeah.
But I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I have lots of photos that I enjoy that I put my promise and heart and soul into that people don't buy, which is fine. I'm glad I did it. But at the same time, I appreciate knowing that I, made that covenant to that photo, that promise to that photo, that everything within it is legitimate. And when people come over
Mm-hmm.
there and they see that image, they know it's legitimate. And because they know I cared enough about the craft. And why do I share that at the end of the day? Is because one, I have to make money, but two, um, it is there are experiences that you cannot get any other way except for I think showing photos in person. One of the reasons why I keep doing what I do, I like displaying my images in front of real people, and I like displaying them in such a way where people say, "Wow." Things that cannot be replicated. When someone walks in and sees a photo and they stop and they gasp, that is something that no amount of Instagram will ever change. That is one of my big whys of why I like doing this. It's an exceptional experience to watch a lady go, and she,
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple people do this and they come and they move to almost tears by an image. Why? I don't know. I don't care. It's something that
Mm-hmm.
is beyond phenomenal. Other experiences you can't get from 10,000 likes. Watching somebody drop $3,000 on an image. Likes are so cheap. They are so cheap. But when somebody drops that amount of money, that's them dropping hours of their existence into you. And that is one of those like unbelievable feelings that I get from, sharing my work. And so I think maybe that's a good place to end this idea of why I do what I do. I like the experience of seeing people have a change. I really like seeing them see an image in person, in real life, and say, wow. And then when they're willing to put $1 or $2 behind it, it makes, supports my work, but it also shows that they're willing to put physically their time into me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you're framing that. You're not saying they're putting their money. It's their time, because that was the sacrifice to get what they have to purchase that piece of art.
Yes.
And you don't get time back. You get money back, but you don't get time back. So it feels like you're valuing the right thing, or honoring what they're actually giving to you.
Yes, and you should do that. That's definitely one of the things, like, you have to remember that. When you have a teenager who buys a photo from you, they're working minimum wage. They're working at a job that is, Walmart or whatever. And when they stop and say, this is worth my time to bother to buy a picture, like, remember that for them, that was a lot of effort. I don't have a stock portfolio that grows and then I get paid a dividend every single month, and I didn't do anything to get that money. Like, always remember the people who are buying your work and are spending, like, they're legitimately spending a part of their existence so they can't get back. And remembering that, it makes a difference, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a profound reframe. I so appreciate that. So I would love to transition and do some wow of our own in looking at some of your pivot pixels. So maybe for the benefit of anybody who might be listening to this and not seeing the actual image, would you just tell us quickly what we're seeing and then tell us about what makes this a pivot pixel for you?
Okay, so this, for you who cannot see, this is an image of a location called Cedar Breaks National Monument. It's located here in southern Utah. It sits roughly at 10,000 feet. The foreground of the image is a series of pine trees covered with a fresh layer of snow. The background is a kind of an amphitheater like Bryce Canyon National Park with hoodoos and fins. And in the distance, the far ground is a mountain with kind of some snow-capped snow layers on top of said mountain and kind of a wispy, cloudy sky. You have side light coming in that's lighting up the amphitheater with kind of a warm glow. So that's your description for you out there without the visuals. Now, why is this image important? Is that what your next question is?
Yes, it is.
Okay. This image is important because this was the first image I ever took that after I stepped away and looked at the photo, I said, holy smokes, I have something here. It's the first photo that I ever took where I felt like, oh, I'm onto something. This isn't just like a point and shoot. It was hey, this has something and I feel something different about this image. And I've gone back and looked at it over the years. It's one of the few images I have that has, foreground, midground, background. It has depth, it has light, it has color, it has all of this idea encapsulated within a single image. And I did it way back in the early days of my photography. And it really was the first image that told me I could do it. I could make decent images. And hopefully you have one of those photos where it sits there and you say, I can do something. Hey, look, this was that photo for me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, do you end up looking at any photos before this one and say, oh, okay, I see the seeds of how I got to here, like that maybe you didn't recognize at the time? Because it sounds like you knew when you looked at it, like, okay, this meets certain, not just the emotional connection, but certain criteria that in your mind makes it an outstanding image.
No, I don't even have any of the photos from before this, hardly at all. This was the image that, from this point forward, I really started keeping things.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. How long were you photographing before you took this one?
So let's rewind. So I got back to college in 2011, 2012, and that's where I started writing a blog called
Mm-hmm.
Southern Utah Hiking, about hiking around Southern Utah. And so that was, I had a little digital point and shoot camera that I took all the photos for that. And so I walked around with that since 2012. And then in 2014, I bought a Canon 60D, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when soon after buying that, I took this photo, and I had a couple others kind of in that same time frame, and so that's really when I started doing things where I'd have files to stick around and hold on to.
Yeah, yeah. So a few years
A few
of,
years, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I just ask that because I think sometimes especially if you're just getting started, you see these really amazing images, and we forget that there were probably a lot of bad
I have
images.
crashed before.
Yeah, just yeah, exactly. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Let's take a look at the next image, and yeah, give us a quick description and what's the significance of this one in your body of work.
Okay, so this image is an image at Zion National Park. I'm up near the very top of the park. And this hoodoo that's here on the left side is not on a trail. It's not named. I don't think it's ever been photographed other than by me. It is, and from its perspective, I'm looking down canyon, and in this image, you can see all the major mountains of Zion National Park within the main canyon. The bottom right corner, there's a little nub, is Angel's Landing. The big mountain there just to the right of the hoodoo on the left side of the canyon is the Great White Throne, and you have the Sentinel, and you can see the top of the West Temple, and then you can see the edges of the Watchman Mountain and Bridge Mountain. All the major mountains within the park are actually seen within this image.
Yeah.
At least to the main canyon. This photo is kind of an emotional photo for me in multiple respects. The first one was when I went to the first point where I was going to go photograph. There were a bunch of people there, and the thing that drove me away was that this was the height of girl in sundress with floppy hat at pretty location Instagram,
Yes.
and there were 3 or 4 people lined up, one right next to each other, with a girl in a sundress with a floppy hat, with her boyfriend standing right behind her with the cell phone, trying to get the photo of her feet off the cliff and looking down canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked up to that scene and I said, I will never photograph in a spot like this. I just can't do it. And so I left and I found this and eventually took the photo. The other things that were happening at this time, this photo marks kind of the end of the first experiment of doing photography full time.
Mm-hmm.
I was working for the Division of Wildlife, and I was wrapping up a season with them, but I wanted to do something different. I wanted to get more experience working in other agencies. And so I ended up leaving the Division of Wildlife, and I had a position lined up for the spring to start soon after this image was taken. And I would go back to regular work, go back to working
Mm-hmm.
for, I think, the Forest Service at the time. And so I had spent the last 4-ish or 5 months doing landscape photography full time. And I
Mm-hmm.
was out photographing, out taking images, out doing art shows and selling images. And this image was kind of the final image of that experiment. And so it was kind of like a farewell to an idea that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know if I would ever come back to or not. And I
Mm-hmm.
ended up going back and working for the Forest Service after this, and spent my time doing that. But it was definitely like one of these like photos that you're like, okay, this is the transition period. This is a change of an era.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
just the experience itself was amazing. I had like a flock of turkey vultures cruising the cliffs right in front of me, And, for them, they're 2,000 feet off the ground. For me, they're like at eye level. And you rarely ever get to see a bird soaring that high up at eye level. And so I had that. And then, of course, the sun set and then the clouds broke into the west. And so it lit up the underside of everything. It was just this phenomenal experience.
Yeah.
But this was kind of a major transition period for me as a photographer, going from one type of career path to a different type of career path.
Yeah. Yeah. And anybody who's listening, if it's not really obvious already, Nathan has, you have a depth and breadth of knowledge about this region of Utah, and I'm sure it extends, beyond that. But I remember attending a webinar that you did with Meredith Fontana for the Nature Photo Collective, and I was just blown away at the knowledge. And I thought, there is nobody else that I think, if I were to do a workshop in this area, you would be an amazing guide.
I'm a lot of fun. One
Yeah.
of the byproducts of working for the Division of Wildlife and the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and you get to kind of go everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I have worked within the parks. I have worked on all the backcountry roads and every podunk dirt road you can imagine out in the southwest corner of the state of Utah, putting around, looking and finding things. And so, yeah. And then when you spend a few years with those type of people, they know lots of other things that you don't. And so you just pick up things. And then in the combination of doing the photography, yeah, it's definitely made me, a pretty knowledgeable person of the region. It's I'm kind of like a walking guidebook anywhere you go with me.
That was my sense. And so a follow-up question then, this region inside and out. And sometimes I hear photographers say, there's nothing left to photograph, maybe in a particular spot. How do you keep this fresh for yourself?
I think, yeah, that's the common concern for some things like Zion National Park. Oh, it's so overcrowded, blah, 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 blah. The way in which I keep it fresh, one is I do a lot of photography on the shoulder times where people are less likely to be there. Two, there are some rules about going off trail and on trail that you have to be conscientious about. There are certain places you want to stick to trails, but there's other places that if you are comfortable, have the ability to navigate off trail, it can lead to a lot of really exciting things. And then number three, there are a handful of places that everybody visits. There are a lot of places that very few people visit. And even those very few people who visit, more often than not, they're like ranchers. And they're not out there doing photos anyways.
Right.
So going out there and pushing, the conditions, what type of condition are you going to go out there and be in and try to do and photograph those types of things in? Can you catch it during kind of wild experiences? Like I never in my wildest days, I would have ever thought of photographing an aurora above Zion National Park, but that happened.
Wow.
And so, always paying attention to kind of wild and weird conditions that come around that can keep things fresh. And then more often than not, there's a lot of really interesting things that are nearby that most people walked past because they didn't think it was worth their time to look at. I know you do a ton of that photography. You're always doing like small and intimate photography. You can still kind of do that same stuff, even with grand landscapes, using the telephoto work and try to like finagle and find things. But there's just certain areas that people just don't go. Even in this image here that you're looking at, if you look straight across where the big white mountain is, that's a great white throne on the far side. Just to the left of that, you see kind of a bright lit up rock face. That's called Deer Trap Mountain over there. Day hikers, I have almost never seen a single photo ever, a fine art photo where somebody put in the effort to go out there and photograph that place at sunset and come back. I mean, I went out there with my dad. I had essentially that entire trail system to myself, or I guess me and him, for 7 hours. I'm in the heart of Zion National Park.
Yeah.
And so like there are still plenty of places that are nearby that people just overlook simply because they're a little bit harder, or because they think they've already been done and they don't
Right.
push one or two steps farther.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. Yeah. Thank you. Um, let's take a look at this third one. What are we seeing here and what's its significance?
Oh man, this photo. So this is a new photo taken in Alaska. This was after finishing something called the Goat Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole experience, so then when I talk about um, why stories matter, this photo is that in a nutshell. This image to get here is not easy. There is no easy way to get to this spot. You have to take a bush plane in, you have to hike for 2 days. It's hard. And then just before this, we came in from what's called the Goat Trail. The Goat Trail gets its name because it is built and maintained by Dall mountain sheep. It is not a trail made by humans. And so a trail not made by humans is not really a trail. It's something you follow and hope it works out. Uh,
Yeah.
Leading up to this experience, we had a rainstorm started pounding on us. And while we're hiking, we started, like, it really started to come down. And on the far side of the canyon wall, rocks began tumbling off the mountain. And so while we're hiking up to get to the goat trail where it officially begins, rocks are tumbling off the mountains. And then we get to the goat trail itself. And I've done enough hiking to know when the ground sucks from just by looking at it most of the time. And I looked at that and I said, that is mud. That sucks. And I started walking on this and I'm doing my darndest. And to describe what this area looks like, imagine a slope like that, where the trail runs along the side and it's soft dirt and mud. And it goes down, then falls off a cliff. And that's the trail. And so I start on this thing and I'm hiking and I slip and I ram my hands and feet into the ground as hard as I can so I don't slide off the mountain. And so I'm virtually panicking at this moment. And the problem was my gear. I didn't get new shoes before I did this. And so my shoes were being more slick than they needed to be. And, you know, me and the guide had a little conversation, got my crap together, and then continued this. But at that point, once I got past to that point, there was no turning around. There was forward, or there was you get to sit here on the side of the cliff. And so it was forward. And so went forward, went through this whole experience, and got to the other side. And it's one of the few times in my life I've actually cried after getting through a section of just being like, this was the most dangerous thing I have personally done in a long time. And I was not comfortable with it. And I have kids now. It's a different story when you don't have kids. But I had kids that I had made promises to that I was coming back to. And so that was weighing on my mind. And so when I got to that end, I was just 100% relieved. But B, it's like the mountain god said, you went through the hard things. Let me gift you something. And so on the valley across from us were these swirling clouds with the peaks popping in and out. And for like the next 4 hours, it was swirling clouds followed by a phenomenal sunset. The best sunset of the whole experience.
Wow.
But it was terrifying. And I would never do it again. But I did it.
Yeah. But you did it. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think of like photography as contact sport.
Yeah. But this goes back to that storytelling. This is the type of story that people remember and talk to you about. And like this photo doesn't tell that story that goes into that. That photo just says cool misty mountains. It doesn't tell you about my emotional experience going through that and why it was such an unpleasant, miserable experience for me. But it ended up with really phenomenal photos.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the story of resilience, perseverance, you know, the bigger meta themes that people can be inspired by. They might never climb this mountain, but maybe they have their own mountain that they're climbing, and something about your story resonates on that level. Do you have one more? Is this also a pivot?
This one's kind of an interesting one. This is kind of goal setting. and
Mm-hmm.
pushing into the unknown. So this
Yeah.
image is the Escalante River. This is something I have been trying to hike the full length of for years now. And everything you see down below you is wilderness. There is no trail down there. You're just following and cutting through and finding animal trails and working your way down. And this is one of those, there are still, to be discovered locations. This area, people pack, raft, and float their way down on occasion when the
Mm-hmm.
conditions work right. And so they zip by this. But when I got up here to this photo, it was such a kind of beautiful experience seeing all of, like, the temples and the mesas and everything out here. But it shows you that there are still places that are wild, and it also shows you that there are still compositions and places that it just takes the effort. You have to push through it. You have to be able to make that effort to go out there. Otherwise, you'll never see them. And so this is
Yeah.
definitely one of those that I treasured this spot because where I walked, there was no other footprints. There were a couple turkey tracks. There was a chunk of petrified wood this big
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that if you were in any other, like, nearby location would have been taken by somebody. It was gorgeous.
Mm.
But I was like,
Wow.
I'm 24 miles from the nearest road. It stays right here.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's part of respecting and honoring nature and leaving it for the next person to appreciate too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. So you mentioned already, you said you're a parent, you're a father and you've got 4 young children.
I do.
Um, yeah. And you mentioned that, many of your peers don't have children. And that kind of sets up an interesting tension. What does it mean for you to be, and these are your words, a family man in a sea of people with no kids? What does that look like? Yeah.
Oh, what does that look like? I think the first thing is that it should give those with kids the reminder that you're not alone. Because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things you will notice, like, I don't know, like, I don't think you have kids, right? And
No.
then almost everybody who's here at the Nature Photo Collective doesn't have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go and see a lot of Instagram posts of people who are traveling the world and they're doing all these wild things, most of them don't have kids. And it really, you have to understand that these are different life choices, and you have to be okay with some of those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have to say, they can do that because they made that life decision. I can do what I can do because I made my life decision. And so first you have to accept that, and also know that you can't be them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you also have to understand that there are certain risks that you can't take. One of the challenges I have found as running my little small business, there are certain risks I am very averse to doing because the consequences are really high. They're really, really high. One of the realities when you're young and single, it doesn't take much to actually functionally live. It really doesn't.
Right.
Uh, you can get a cheap car. You can live out of your cheap car. You can work on a laptop at gas stations or whatever, and get free Wi-Fi. And you can run a fairly successful, cheap photography business doing that. And you can make mistakes, and it won't really
Mm-hmm.
matter because you're young and you're single, and there's no consequences. When you're a little bit older, if you make a mistake, there are consequences. One of the realities that I have a tug and with myself. What's the value of a photo trip?
Mm-hmm.
We could look at a photo trip as being, oh, it's just there for me to creatively create. Cool. Uh, at the same time, I have to come away with something that can justify me being gone for 4 days. And that makes everything a different mindset. And it's really hard to balance that mindset because it's almost like a transaction. Is it worth the effort? Is it worth my time to go and do this? Will I make $1 from this? Will I spend a few $100s or even $1,000 doing this? And at the end of the day, that could have been $1,000 that fed a kid.
Yeah.
That's a different weight on my shoulders than if you are walking the forest and you just say, I'm just creating. And so that's something that I fight with constantly is
Mm.
how do I justify what I do? How do I justify buying X, right? Oh, I can just get one more lens. I could, but I can also make do with what I have. And so
Right.
it's something that weighs on me constantly. Um, but there was a tipping point. Oh, sorry, I have a doorbell. I think I have a kid who's just pushing on a doorbell. See, kids.
See, kids.
There was a
Case
tipping
in
point
point.
years ago, and the photo's not in. At least I don't think it's in your little slides. It's an arch on Navajo land,
Mhm.
and it's hard to get to. And I went out there with a guide, and I spent a bunch of money, and I went out there, and the photo didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. And for whatever reason, I was kind of feeling crappy that night, and then so I was feeling miserable just physically. And then I had this experience where I didn't quite get the photo I wanted. Because if it had been the photo I wanted, it would have been a phenomenal photo, and it probably would have sold really well. And I didn't get that. And I don't know. Have you ever had this experience where you go on a photo trip and you have 2.5 hours to drive back home and grumble the whole way?
Yeah. Yes.
Right? And so I
Yeah.
got back home and I was pissing and moaning about this to my wife. And she's like, you've got to change or stop doing photography. And
Mm.
that was definitely one of those moments where I had to like make that shift where I just had to be happy with what I had.
Yeah.
But always in the back of my mind is was it the money I dropped here justifiably reasonable or was it not? Now I come up with ways to try to mitigate that. Calendar sales are one of those things because I can go and throw a photo that I don't think will be a great photo for a huge picture, but I can still tuck it someplace and generate
Mm-hmm.
money that comes out of it afterwards.
Yeah.
So that's the advantage of those types of images. But it's definitely something that creatively weighs on me. Why do grand landscapes? Why do I focus a lot on grand landscapes? They kind of sell well. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's one of the things that I do a lot of, even though I would like to do more other things. But at the same time, I have to justify my time doing those other things to whether they will, put food in the mouth of a small, hungry child.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so how do you balance then? It's kind of harkening back to our beginning when we talked about doing it for the love of it is absolutely legitimate, like with no other agenda.
Yep.
And you're trying to find that I'm doing it for the love of it and I have an agenda. I have
Yep.
a very clear reason for doing this. How do you find time, if you do, to do maybe some of that photography that's pushing into a different area that's maybe not able to be monetized in some way? Is there any space for that?
It is always tucked in at the sides.
Yeah.
So how do I find time? First and foremost, the longer I've done this, the more picky I've become.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of really great sunsets that have happened lately that I haven't gone out and done. But I also have a lot of really nice photos from around here that I'm not really itching to go get another photo from around here. And so things that I look forward to now are very specific conditions where I can maximize the use of my time and my dollar to get the best photo. And so I will let go a lot of average for the potential better. And so I've already got a dozen photos of Zion National Park, but I don't have a photo of a rainbow at this spot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the conditions might look like it might work well for that tomorrow. Let's go do that at sunrise and catch that and come back home. I do a lot of that. Much of my existence is half a day. Much of my existence is half a day. The other part of my existence is I will plan and I do a lot of double dipping. So I do art shows around the region. So I do like a Moab art show. I do an Escalante art festival. I do, something up there in the Wasatch Mountain area. And I go to an art show. I wrap up for that day and I photograph that evening. I photograph that morning and then I go to an art show and I do that all day. And then I photograph that evening and I photograph that morning and I do an art show. And I do that constantly. And so
Mhm.
my work days, depending on what I'm doing and where I'm at, my work days start at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to 10 or 11 or midnight at night. And then I get up and do it again because that's what I have to do. And so if you look through my Escalante portfolio of images, I can tell you a lot of those photos over there were created at sunrise or sunset at the end of an art show after I'd already been at an art show for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours and went off and did another picture and hiked someplace and then woke up the next morning and did it again. So I squeeze it in as much as I can depending on what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's so many lessons in there for those of us who don't have children that are super valuable because I do believe that there is a power in limitations.
No,
And I don't mean that in a negative way, but just like saying, I have half a day instead of, I've got this entire week, which sounds very spacious, but how much of that week do we waste?
yeah,
Or, sometimes having those limitations forces us into some sort of focus. And you're also, highlighting the importance of, persistence and like a work ethic. If you really want it, you've got to put in that work. You've got to get up at 4
yeah,
a.m.
that's a big one. If you really want it, you got to put in the effort. That's the thing that I find is the biggest challenge. I almost think for almost any photographer who is starting off landscape photography and just they're like, oh, I want to have good photos. Like, do you
Mm-hmm.
really want them? I mean,
Right.
let's. I have a photo from a place in Zion called Sandbench Trail. It's a 3.5 mile walk out to the end of the trail, but to get the sunset, you have to wait until after the sunset, as it goes down. The last shuttle from Zion leaves at sunset. So
Uh-huh.
that's a 3 mile walk out, then another 6 mile walk out to the car or a 5 mile walk out to the car. Do you really want it? And so that day I said yes. And I hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I hurt a lot by the time I came home, but I did it because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted it.
Yeah. 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 Awesome. Well, Nathan, how can people get more of what you do? Where can they find you best?
They can find me best. My website is standrephotography.com. I do post on Instagram. I'm at Southern Utah Photo. But honestly, the place that you should go to follow me is you should go join my newsletter. I try
Mm-hmm.
to tell stories. I try to share interesting things. And then that's where I also share regularly all of my upcoming art shows. I love
Mm-hmm.
talking to people. I don't have any problems with it. So if you would like to come and chit chat with me at an art show, I'll gladly talk with you at an art show. Or if you want to, join me someplace, the workshops are coming up. But if you're passing through the region, hit me up. We'll see if I can, get you someplace interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
and so I do all, just say hi.
Right.
I
Be
will
friendly.
gladly.
Yeah.
There's
That's
there's
one thing we
almost no
love.
subject too deep and no place too far I won't go.
Yeah, yeah, clearly. We've heard stories about that and that's inspiring and I've said this sometimes before like it really puts into perspective when I think I'm pushing myself to get up at 5 a.m. and hike a mile into somewhere and I'm like, woohoo, look at what I did. So it's all relative, and when I hear stories like that, it pushes me to like say, okay, next time it's going to be 2 miles or it's going to be 5 miles. Um,
Yeah, and I think that actually the more important thing is because I do push. I'm young enough and fit enough that I can push myself and do that. I know not everybody who's listening to this is going to be able to be like,
mhm.
oh, let me just go hike off. I think the more challenging thing is that people have an adverseness to is uncomfortable.
Yes.
Being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really good photos that can be had that just require one night of being uncomfortable. Can you
Yeah.
camp someplace? I know it's not
Mhm.
as nice and comfortable as a hotel, but how much do you want it? Do you
Right.
want that photo? Yes or no? Are you willing to drive that 3 hours? And in the West, 3 hours isn't that much. I know back East,
No.
3 hours is pushing a long way. Three
Mhm.
hours is just for me to get to Bryce. Then
Yes.
it's 2 hours round trip for me to drive to Zion and back. And so it just can you be uncomfortable for one day? Can you sleep out and camp someplace for just one day and then push yourself that one time? And if you can do that, you expand your world considerably. If you only live in the comfort, you end up being very limited to just society and the few bubbles around that. But if you can push to the uncomfortable level, you can find yourself in phenomenal locations that don't require a huge amount of hiking, but just require you to be uncomfortable just a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's an awesome, inspiring note to end on. So thank you, Nathan, so much for your time and your wisdom. And I'll make sure that there are links to your website, the workshops, etc., Nature Photography Collective, all in the description. So I hope folks will check that out. So thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let us know in the comments what was most useful or meaningful to you. And be sure to subscribe so that you're notified of future episodes. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.